Hello and welcome to episode 12 of the Crash and Ride podcast. I'm Patrick Ferguson. I'm your host. Crash and Ride is a long-form interview podcast where we explore the journeys of musicians who've survived anxiety and depression. Today's guest is Josie Cool, a trans musician from Englewood, Colorado, which is right outside of Denver. Josie is the guitar player in Teacup Gorilla, drummer in Ersatz Robots. She's the guitar player in a new band called the Altar Girls, and she's formerly the guitar player of a band called the Great American Housefire. Josie's interview was actually one of the longest I've ever done. I felt like it was important to preserve as much of it as I could because this is the first time I've had a really long and personal conversation with a trans person. And if you're a cis, het, white, straight, middle-aged guy like me from Georgia, you know, it couldn't hurt to preserve as much detail as possible. I learned a lot. I learned so much. It's one of my favorite interviews I've done so far. I'm presenting it in two parts. We're going to do part one this week and part two next week. So be sure not to miss the second half of the interview, which comes out Sunday, June 2nd. If you're new to the podcast, I'm also a working musician. I play drums in the rock band 5/8 from Athens, Georgia. I also play in Mike Mills from REM's orchestral side project, the Mike Mills Concerto. And I play drums with the high-energy rock band from Japan, Pinky Doodle Poodle. I'm the only non-Japanese member. We've been playing a bunch of shows. We just did a big Northeastern tour. A writer on that tour describes seeing Pinky Doodle Poodle as like watching the Bad Brains rip through a set of cream covers, which I thought was pretty cool. Pinky Doodle Poodle has like 30 shows in the next 6 weeks, so I'm going to give you the first few of those. May 31st, we're playing at the Georgia Theater Rooftop here in Athens, Georgia. June 1st, we're playing Club 529 in Atlanta, Georgia. Man, I really love that club. 529 has this great patio. I don't drink anymore, but man, if I did, you'd have to pull me off that patio with a tractor. It's a really nice place to be in the summertime. June 5th, Pinky Doodle Poodle is playing at Snug Harbor in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's the beginning of a 4-week residency where we play there every week. June 6th, the Burro Bar and Grill in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. June 7th, Melody Inn in Indianapolis, Indiana. June 8th, we're playing the PRF Barbecue in Chicago, Illinois. June 9th, we're at the Mag Bar in Louisville, and June 10th, we're in Nashville. I don't know the exact venue for that, but I'll get back to you next week with the second half of Josie's interview. I'll also have that date. I want to tell you that Crash and Ride is brought to you in part by Greer Amplification. Greer Amps builds the best boutique effects pedals available. If you're looking for an overdrive, boost, fuzz, compressor, or tremolo that is rugged, road-tested, and at home on stage, in the studio, or in your living room, Greer has a pedal for you. Nick and his staff strive to build the best products around with the best tone you've ever heard. They believe in their products and they stand behind them too, backing each one up with a lifetime warranty to the original owner. Each Greer Amps product is hand-built in Athens, Georgia, USA. Go to www.greeramps.com or visit your local music retailer today. Crash and Ride has also been generously helped out by Jittery Joe's, a local coffee roaster here in Athens, Georgia. They've blended a special espresso just for the program. It's called Crash and Ride. It'll soon be available in the Jittery Joe's web store. It'll eventually be available on the web store I'm building for Crash and Ride. It'll soon be available in Jittery Joe's retail locations. Or if you want to sign up on our Patreon page for a $35 a month pledge, you support the program, and I send you a can of coffee every month, postage paid. That's www.patreon.com/crashandride. So here's the thing I want to talk about before I jump into our interview with Josie. Years ago, when trans rights became an issue that we talked about as a culture, really sort of entering the public consciousness. I'm not saying that trans people are a new thing, but you know, I didn't know any trans people really growing up. And it sort of sprang into public consciousness, and I realized that I had some transphobia. And, I mean, that's not an easy thing to admit, but it didn't take me long to figure out that, you know, having grown up with all kinds of other cognitive biases and racism that people have in the South and really anywhere in the United States, I knew that it wasn't something that was wrong with trans people, but that it was something that was wrong with me. So the question is, how do you overcome a bias? Like, how do you overcome your own prejudice? And I set out to do that, like start short-circuiting my own bad thought processes and think, what is wrong with you, man? What the fuck is your problem? You need to get over this. And, you know, I've come a long way, and I was really excited to talk to Josie, and it was really brave of her to open up to me because I'm essentially a complete stranger to her. And I'm just really grateful for her taking the risk that she did and agreeing to do this, and I feel like it was a really good conversation. So thanks, Josie. I want to remind everybody that if you're having a really hard time kind of keeping it together and and you're contemplating self-harm, that the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is 24/7. It's confidential. It's free. There are volunteers on staff. They're trained to listen and help guide you to the community resources that you need to help you get the assistance that you need to survive this. So don't sit there and suffer. Call 1-800-273-8255. That number again, 1-800-273-8255. Okay, well, here is part one of our interview with Josie Cool. Okay, I'm here with Josie Cool, a multi-instrumentalist from Englewood, Colorado, which is, as she just told me, outside Denver. She's a guitar player in Teacup Gorilla, plays drums in Ersatz Robots, and is starting a new band that is tentatively titled the Altar Girls. She's formerly of the Great American Housefire. Welcome, Josie.
Hello.
It's really great to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you so much. It's my pleasure.
So we were just, before I started the recording, we were starting to talk about this incredible drum kit you snagged the other day, and I kind of want to continue that discussion for just a second.
Sure. Yeah, we'll jump right into nerd talk here.
I mean, why not? It's a musician's podcast.
So I walked into a store yesterday, a pawn shop in Colorado. My partner's family lives in Colorado Springs, and so we went down there to see them. And her dad is a huge fan of pawn shopping too, and that's something that we've bonded over. So I went. He was like, Josie probably wants to go pawn shopping this afternoon. I was like, I could do some pawn shopping. So him and I went out and hit up a few shops, and it seems like every time I go down there, I find something. Like I always bring home a guitar or a pedal or something weird. So the Ludwigs, I walk in now, they're not perfect, mind you, but, I walked in, and when I saw them at first, like they're bright yellow. And when I saw them from across the room, I was like, oh, weird. 60s Japanese import kit. That's kind of neat. And so I walked over to look at them, because my friend Jim, that's in this new band with me, he loves weird stuff, especially MIJ stuff. Right. And so I walked over to him, and they had the Ludwig standard badge on them, and I was like, "Oh no, I know what these are." And right. I looked at them, and I was like, "Oh, I know what these are exactly."
Right. And they didn't.
They didn't. No. They had them marked at $260. So.
If you hear a loud sound, it's me jumping out of a window.
Yeah. Well,
you bought a set of Ludwig 3-plies with a matching snare, and they were marked at $275.
Yeah.
$260.
Now, and just wait for this. They've been in that store since October.
Oh, for God's sakes.
Yeah. And
so the Lemon Strata
in the middle of May. So they've been there for, 8 months or something.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Yeah. And
so how much did you give for them? When they put them out,
they were marked at $400. Now let me preface this by saying every head is trash. So they've got to have new heads all the way around.
I mean, okay.
They're missing a little bit of hardware here, and like there's no stands whatsoever. So, I could see anybody that didn't know what they were coming in and being like, "Ooh, those drums need a lot of work." So I go to the guy the pawn shops here, I don't know if they're like this everywhere, but they have this thing where after the first 90 days, they drop it a little bit in price, and it says on the ticket, after 90 days, it's this price. After another 30 days, it's this price. After another 45 days, it's this price. And they had just dropped to $260. And so I go to the guy and I'm like, I like these drums, but they're missing hoops and all the heads are bad. And, they're missing a little hardware. And
man, you came in hard. You were like, you were haggling.
I'm gonna work this guy or whatever. And he's like, okay, what, I was like, I like him. I'd like to take him home, but, I need you to take some money off of them. And he's like, they've been sitting around for forever. What do you, you know, I can maybe take some cash off of them. What do you want them for? I was like, I want to walk out of here with them for $200. And the guy's like, write them up for $200. So I walked out of there with the kit for $200.
That is the best price I've ever heard anyone get on a set of 3-ply Ludwigs, full stop. That is amazing.
That's what I thought. I was pretty happy with myself.
And that lemon strata finish is really popular. Like people, it's a beautiful, beautiful finish.
It's so pretty.
You find a lot of deals like that. Huh?
Oh, I find all kinds of stuff. Yeah. A lot of people don't look into what they have. And for 20 years, I sat on eBay, like I would spend my time watching TV with my partner. And then I would just sit on eBay, like, you know, I'm watching TV out of one eye. And then I'd sit on my laptop and like surf through eBay and see what things were worth. And so like, you know, I learned about every guitar that Gibson made or whatever. And, you know, in doing that for 10 years or whatever, I learned a lot of stuff. You know, you're the same way. You learned everything there is to know about drums, essentially over 30 years of playing.
That was because I had
I was in a band.
Sorry.
Go ahead. This band was called Spoke Shaver. We were like a emo prog band, I guess. Which is a weird thing to say. Like, you know, everything about punk rock was rebelling against prog rock, I guess. But we were doing our best to try and fuse the two together. We were writing 15-minute long suites of music that were like filled with punk rock and emo, you know, things. But yeah, I don't know. It was a really fun band, and I loved that band. But Rich,
that could be really transcendent to see, though.
It was fun for sure. Yeah. I've always tried to put on the best show I can. And I realize I'm diverging massively here, but that's fine. That'll be this whole interview.
Right.
I always tried to put on the best show I can. Like on stage, I am literally throwing myself, you know, everywhere on stage. Like I can't help but dance around some, and like I just flail around everywhere.
Do you ever get hurt?
Yeah, sometimes. But so you know, sometimes I flail around because I'm so lost in the music, and it seems like something that I should be doing.
Right.
And then sometimes I flail around because I'm upset at what's happened before the show, or whatever.
Tell me about your early life, if you're comfortable with jumping into that.
Sure. Yeah.
Where were you born?
Yeah, there's. I was born in Nebraska in 1980. In North Platte, Nebraska. It's a little town on I-80. It's like 20,000 people. And
I get the impression driving through Nebraska the few times that there's Omaha, and then there's lot of Lincoln, and then a lot of smaller towns that were just kind of agricultural hubs where like people who were basically growing food for the entire world would come at the harvest and come to buy pesticides and stuff like that too. Yeah,
that's pretty much correct. Yeah. Nebraska's kind of interesting. The Platte River runs like right along the interstate, and it's kind of western Nebraska especially is all sand hills, and they call it the Great American Desert. Like there's jack shit that can grow out in the desert itself. Right. But along the river,
has anybody taken that band name?
The Great American Desert?
Yeah.
I don't know if they have, but it is pretty good now that you mention it.
Yeah.
You like the hills themselves, you can grow grass a little bit. Like there's prairie grass that grows up there, but it's really hard to grow like food at all up in the hills. Because the soil is just so sandy.
Right, but along the alluvial plain of the river, there's a lot of sediment that's washed down from...
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, for maybe 15, 20 miles on either side of the river, you can grow stuff. And then it gets up into hills and you can't. So people settled along the river there, and that's where the Oregon Trail went through. But like that's where all of the population is, essentially, is along the rivers. And then you get up into the hills at all, and there's nothing. So population is weird in Nebraska. Like, there's tons of little towns along the interstate there because that's where people were settling. And we lived in North Platte, but we lived outside of town. My parents built a house up in the hills, like 5 miles north of town or whatever there. And we had a neat house that my dad built himself. Like, he built the foundation all by himself and had a modular home put on top of it. And
were you an only child?
Oh no, I've got a sister, who's 6 years younger than me. And she's great. I love my sister a lot. She lives here in Denver also. And for whatever reason, we like barely talk or interact or see each other. I don't know. Like, I love my family, but I'm kind of sour on family right now. Not because I dislike my mom or my sister at all, but I have such sour feelings about my dad and my grandma right now that I think I'm letting it spill over into my relationship with my mom and my sister.
Yeah.
So,
your father passed a few years ago, as I recall.
Yeah. My grandmother, she was the matriarch of our family. She made sure that my dad went to school and paid for his college, and they were grooming him to be the president of the country, essentially, from a very young age. And they were making him go to school in pre-law so that he could then go to an Ivy League school to get his law degree. And then he could go on to public office, essentially, and climb the ranks to be a governor or a senator, and maybe one day be president, I think was the plan. And he got to his sophomore year in school and was like, I don't want to be a lawyer. I don't want to be president. I want to be an artist. And this is all awful, and I hate it. And started doing acid and did a bunch of peyote and failed out of his junior finals, and like took 2 weeks off of school and failed out of his junior finals to do peyote with a bunch of Native American Lakota Sioux kids.
Where was that?
And he was going. What was that?
Was that in Omaha?
He was going to Kearney State College, which was in Kearney, Nebraska, which is it's about, I want to say, 90 miles east of Lincoln, or west of Lincoln. Sorry. And that's where he met my mom, and they fell in love. And he became an art student and graduated with a fine arts degree and a minor in political science, I think, and became an art teacher.
Your dad and I's trajectory is alarmingly familiar. It's I'm sorry, alarmingly similar.
Yeah.
That's wild. So did your dad and your grandma ever reconcile over this?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, my grandpa and my grandma couldn't really argue with that. I mean, they obviously weren't happy that he was like using drugs, I don't think, but they also like could tell that he was incredibly talented as an artist or whatever. And they were like, well, we're not going to stop you if that's your passion. But at the same time, like, they made him get a minor in political science at least. And when he went to teach, he was teaching sociology classes and art classes for his first couple of years because he went and taught in a little teeny town in northwest Nebraska called Oshkosh, which had like, I think there was maybe 300 kids in the whole entire school or something. So that wasn't enough kids to just take art. So that's why he had to teach political science too,
right.
Which I thought was kind of funny. But then he got a job in North Platte where his parents lived, and my mom dropped out of college to go with him, like to go live with him. And because she was a year younger, I think, or something. And so they moved to North Platte, and he got a teacher job as an art teacher there. They had 2 art teachers actually, which is pretty impressive that the art department was that big. And he grew the art department to the point where they were over capacity of students, which is really impressive.
Yeah.
So
your dad seems like a real character. Like seems like he's got a lot of willpower and a lot of like he built his own house, and he created an art program, and he broke with this sort of family expectation, which, as you and I both know as artists and sort of black sheep, that it's not an easy thing to do. No.
Yeah, for sure. And he, like, later in life, he kind of figured out that he was bipolar and manic depressive.
Oh.
Self-diagnosed, but he also never went in and got diagnosed. So,
right.
And the way he always explained it was like he was manic and bipolar, and he kind of figured these things out about himself. And so he just always created a party around himself so that he'd never get depressed. Like he just was manic all the time and just wanted to be up all the time. So he created a fun atmosphere around himself to the point where he'd never be sad and he'd never get depressed. And a little bit, that's so hard to maintain. Like he was also very likely ADHD from a young age. And I mean, as kids, it's fun because like you got the summers off, we're going camping for 2 weeks at a time, or, you know, every weekend we had 13 Volkswagens around our house at one point, in various disrepair and parts. And, you know, we had a garage and, you know, every weekend he was pulling the motor out of a Volkswagen and replacing it or whatever. He had built show cars, like show Volkswagens that had won trophies, and we had built cars for people. And he had, you know, he built his own spray booth in the garage one time so that he could paint vehicles. And I remember one time him and a bunch of friends got together and cut the top off of a Volkswagen and built and like welded the door shut and built a Baja that was like completely welded shut so that they could float it through rivers. And they were always doing just absolutely batshit things. So
my experience with people who spend that much time maintaining an up, when they finally do have it down, it's pretty deep and spectacular.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember a couple of mornings, you know, waking up to him throwing chairs across rooms and breaking light switches. And I remember one morning getting up and he had trashed the refrigerator and broken all of the, you know, pickle and mayonnaise jars inside of it or whatever. And it didn't happen often. But
was your dad self-medicating at all with his
Yeah. He smoked weed constantly. And I never realized because he hit it really well, I guess. And also I was a kid, like, I was really sheltered, I guess. I didn't know what it was. I remember this one time, we went on a class field trip to the state patrol office in North Platte. And they were like, "No, we're gonna burn a little bit of this weed so that you can smell what it smells like, and so that if you smell this, you can tell an adult about it, and
you could rat your parents out.
Someone's smoking weed." Yeah, exactly. And I smelled it, and I was like, I've smelled that before. Hey, Mom, we smell that. That's what the cigarettes that you smoke smells like. And she was like, no, that's not. That's something else. And I was like, no, Dad smokes. And like, she's like, no, that's something else. And like, everybody's looking at her and she's like, no, she doesn't know what she's talking about. I later found out that my dad was actually dealing weed to the students in the high schools that he worked at. And that might have been why he was such a popular teacher. Who knows?
Yeah, I figures, right?
And, you know, not big, I don't think. Like, if he had some students that were really good, close students or whatever, he might sell them a little bit of weed. I don't think it was like he was dealing to the whole school or anything. But I remember we had this big deep freeze in Nebraska, like a big refrigerator full of frozen goods or whatever. Right. And there were all these little baggies of weed in there. And I'd ask my mom what they were, and she's like, oh, it's oregano and spices and stuff like that. I was like, oh, okay. And they were like right next to my ice pops that I'd go for when I was a kid or whatever. Did
your father never had did he ever try to get sober or anything, or was this just something he did right up until the end?
On the day he passed away, let me preface this. When he got older, he had really, really horrible cluster headaches, which a cluster headache is, it's like an ice cream headache that lasts for 3 hours in his case. And it's continuous. You can't stop it. Well, It's really, really hard to stop it. And for him, they were cyclical. So they would happen every 4 hours on the dot. Like, he would be like, okay, well, I've got one at 3, and then I'll have another one at 7. And then I've got another one, at whatever, 11. And then I've got another one coming up at 3 again in the morning. And then another one at 7 in the morning. And then another one at 11 in the morning. And he could stop them if he would feel one coming on, and then he'd take oxygen instantly and drink coffee because caffeine helped him for them. And get up and walk around a little bit. And then if he couldn't do those, he had these shots that cost $1,200 a piece.
Jesus Christ.
That was pretty much straight psilocybin extract. And he would inject it into his leg, and it wouldn't actually stop the headache, but it would just make him pass out instantly. And he couldn't feel it then. So he would still be having the headache, but he would sleep right through it. So, yeah.
So you said on the day that he passed.
The day that he passed, because of these cluster headaches, he wasn't sleeping much. Mm-hmm. Like maybe 2 or 3 hours at a time, and he'd try and get 2 or 3 naps a day at 2 or 3 hours. So he was maybe sleeping 4 to 6 hours a day.
Right. And how old is he at this point?
Let's see, 63 or 4, something like that.
So he passed pretty young.
Yeah. And he also had been losing weight like crazy. He was always he was a 6 foot tall guy, and or he was 6'1", and the last time I saw him, he had shrunk to about 5'11", something like that. He had horrible spinal column stuff. He had vertebrae fused from spinal discs rupturing and stuff like that.
Right.
And he just was shrinking. Like the last time I saw him, I had a good 1.5 to 2 inches on him, which was weird.
So you're 6 feet.
Yeah. I was 6'1". Hormone therapy has made me shrink a little bit. Which is weird also. It turns your pelvis slightly because the female pelvis and the male pelvis are in slightly different positions. So my pelvis has shifted slightly, and I lost about 1 inch, which is nice. I will take every bit of shortening I can get.
Right.
He woke up at about 2 in the morning, my mom said, and started laundry because that's what he does. And then he was going to drive back. My grandma passed away on May 14th. and my dad was going to go back on at the end of June to take care of some stuff with her estate. And so he got up, and she had willed him her Cadillac Brougham after she had passed. He took her car, and she was excited about that he was going to take it because she didn't want it sold or whatever. And he had never had like a really nice car. He had always
he had a whole shitload of Volkswagens though.
Yeah, exactly. He had like a Volkswagen Baja and a Volkswagen Bus, and after that he had bought this, like, the newest car he owned was this Ford F-250 pickup that was all jacked up in this air that had a camper on the back of it. And like this was a nice luxury car with heated seats and cruise control, and you didn't have to fight it when you drive down the road. He had never had a car like that before. Like, it practically drove itself, he had told us several times. And so he got up at 2 a.m. and started some laundry and just started packing that goddamn Cadillac full of shit. Like, put some chairs in the back of it or whatever, some like camping chairs, and put a bunch of clothes in the back of it for whatever reason, and just loaded the thing down with a bunch of shit. And
what do you think the plan was there?
He was going back for the 4th of July. And he wanted to have some chairs to sit in the front seat. And then some of it was my grandma's clothes. That there was a girl back in Nebraska that was a former student of his that he had been friends with. And he was going to give her some of the clothes because he thought that she might want them.
So your dad is leaving from Colorado.
So he was, what?
Your dad is leaving from Colorado. He's not living in
Wyoming,
Platte.
Actually, he lived in Casper, Wyoming, which is where I went to high school at.
Okay.
So he's driving from Casper, Wyoming down to North Platte, which is about an 8-hour trip. 6 probably in the Cadillac. And so, he gets up early in the morning. And the point of this story was he gets up, does laundry, goes to his dealer's house in the middle of the night and buys a bunch of weed to stock up for the 4th of July holiday. Goes and buys breakfast at his favorite breakfast joint and eats a huge chicken fried steak, and then gets on the road about 4 a.m. and drives for Nebraska. And about 6 a.m., right as dawn is breaking, he got really tired from smoking a bit of weed and eating a huge chicken fried steak, and fell asleep at the wheel. And he had heated seats in the car, and he had it on cruise control, and it practically drove itself. So he didn't have to be paying attention to it. And he was listening to some Eric Clapton or something, and dozed off, and woke up and noticed he was crossing lanes and self-corrected too much. And the car was loaded down, and he swerved into the median and rolled the car 6 times.
Oh my gosh.
And was thrown from the car and killed on the scene. So in a single vehicle accident. So, and this was about a month and a half after my grandma had passed away.
Wow.
And my mom called me 3 hours after he passed away because State Patrol had been sent to her house to tell her that he had passed. So, and she called me, and when I saw the call come in, she didn't even have to tell me. When I saw her phone number come up, I knew what it was.
Yeah.
And it was a hard funeral. Like, it was so unexpected, of course.
Right.
And at the time, so I suppose I should address for everybody. I'm transgender, in case anybody didn't know. Transgender female, and I decided to transition at the age of 35, which was the November after my dad passed away. So this would have been June 30th is when he passed away. Yeah. And that November is when I decided to start transitioning. And at the time, it wasn't on my mind at the time of him passing. When my grandma passed away, I didn't cry. I didn't shed a single tear. Like, I was taught from a young age that boys don't cry. Boys need to be strong, and you need to be stoic, and you need, when you have those feelings, you don't let them out. You don't let anybody see that, because that shows weakness, and weakness isn't something that you want to project. Then my dad passed away like a month later, and my mom was crying horribly. And my sister was like, she couldn't even drive. She was like, is there any way I could ride with you and Jen, my partner? And I was like, yeah, of course you can. She was like, I'll be a wreck. I can't, I'm crying too much. And I was like, yeah, I'm not crying. I can drive. I'll drive us all up. Sure. So I drove all of us up to my mom's house in Wyoming. Her and my partner were both just bawling. And at the time I thought I was the man of the family then, and I had to take care of it all. On the way up, my mom called and was like, hey, can you stop in Wheatland, Wyoming, where the accident happened, and get some of his personal effects and go get stuff from the car that he was driving, because there's all this stuff in the trunk that we need, or that, that I would like, because he had his wallet and he had this pistol that was with him, because he had started carrying a pistol everywhere he went.
What do you think motivated that?
Living in Wyoming, everyone there is crazy and gun nuts and Republicans and awful. And he had his computer and he had his cell phone, and like the police refused to give us any of that stuff unless you come and pick it up in person. In a lot of ways, it was very good that I hadn't transitioned yet, I guess. Because there is no way those people would have dealt with me kindly if me of right now had been dealing with them.
Right.
And I probably wouldn't have even tried, to be honest.
Yeah.
But at the time, I looked like a good old boy. So I went and dealt with them and got everything I needed. But I also had to see the car that my dad died in, like about a day after he died. And as I was climbing through the car that he died in, I cut my arm wide open. I actually, yesterday on Facebook, or 2 days ago, I guess now, I started a thread about having everybody tell me about their scars, because I thought it would be really interesting. And it was, I thought. But I think about scars a lot, because I've got a lot of physical scars. And I think we all have a lot of mental scars too. But I've got this scar on kind of the fatty part of my elbow, on the bottom part.
Right.
Because I was climbing through the car and there was jagged metal in there from the front bumper of this Cadillac got torn off, and they just threw it in the back seat of the car. And so I was climbing over it and tore my arm open on a piece of jagged metal. And I still have a scar from it from 4 years later.
Have you ever read Kelly Hogan's essay about recovering the ring of one of the musicians in the Jody Grind who was killed in the head-on collision back in 1991 or 2?
Huh, no.
I think you might find it illuminating and maybe helpful a little bit.
Yeah.
You know Kelly, of course. She's formerly backup singer for Nico Case, and there's a great front person.
I was trying to place the name, yeah.
She did some stuff with Silkworm, too. But I knew Kelly. I don't want to derail this conversation too much, but I feel like this sort of act of excavating your loved one's things from a fatal accident is it's pretty traumatic, and she wrote about it pretty candidly. She was in a band with some really good friends of mine. Bill Taft was the guitar player. Kelly was the singer. There were two Roberts, one who played bass and one who played drums, Robert. And then, of course, there was Timothy Tyson Ruttenberg, who went by the name Deacon Lunchbox. And they played a show. Deacon Lunchbox was this enormous redheaded grizzly bear of a man who would dress in drag and do these poems that were more like chants, and he would punctuate the time by hitting this enormous Army surplus bombshell with a hammer. And and he was just brilliant. And so there was and of course usually the Jody Grind played shows, and Deacon Lunchbox would also play with him, and they played a show in Pensacola, Florida. And Bill and Monday was Easter, and so the rest of the band decided to drive home, and they were hit head on by a driver who fell asleep at the wheel. And Kelly has an essay on her sort of personal blog site about retrieving some of the belongings of the band from the accident. And
survivor's guilt in that case, I'm sure.
Oh man, so much. And I'm sure that you guys probably have some shared experiences with that sort of excavation of. Sounds like your dad jammed the car really full of stuff too. Yeah.
My sister wrote directly after his passing. He always would say that he wanted to go peacefully in his sleep like his dad, not screaming in terror like his passengers.
Oh my God, that's so dark.
Yeah. Typical my dad.
Oh man, that's dark.
But also, like, he kind of got his wish, I guess.
I guess he did.
Not exactly, but he did go peacefully in his sleep. Sort of. I mean, he kind of woke up right beforehand, but it was quick, I guess, is the one thing that we all said. Like, it wasn't some long, drawn out, prolonged thing. And we saw Alzheimer's coming on because of the headaches. They were absolutely leading to early onset Alzheimer's disease.
Oof.
And he was going to waste away, and it was going to be really ugly and awful.
I have two very, very close friends whose fathers lingered for almost a decade after the onset of Alzheimer's, and it got really tough for the family.
Yeah. And my mom would trade 10 years of awful to be with him for 10 more years, of course, than to have him ripped away from her like that.
Yeah.
But, it's really nice to be able to remember him as being loud and full of spirit, and not being a burden on the family, I guess.
Yeah.
Also, I have all of these really conflicting memories of him now that I've been in therapy for the last 4 years. And now I don't know how to feel about it.
Were you doing therapy before he died?
No.
Huh. Did you have dysmorphia as a child? Like, what was your childhood like?
Dysphoria.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. The only reason I correct is I kind of have both.
Help me understand the difference.
Dysphoria relates to your gender.
Right.
And in this case, I have gender dysphoria, which relates to my body not matching the gender of my brain.
Okay.
And then I also, to a much lesser extent, have body dysmorphia,
right,
in which I don't like my body because it's overweight.
Uh-huh.
And I conflate the two a lot of times. It's really hard to tell which is which, because I don't like being a fat girl.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't like being a fat girl that also looks mannish.
Right.
So, yeah, I don't know. It's hard to deal with.
Dysphoria it's the opposite of euphoria.
Exactly.
So if you say gender dysphoria, to me it sounds like an elemental, profound lack of joy about your gender.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And there are moments where you can actually have gender euphoria about your body. And for years before transition, I would present female and feel euphoria.
Right.
I didn't have the words for that at the time. But that absolutely was what I was experiencing. And
so you started your transition at 35.
Yeah.
And it was just months after your father passed, correct?
Yeah. Starting transition and medically starting transition are kind of two different things. Like admitting that I'm transgender to somebody and then like going through the whole process and starting to take medication for it and starting, a different hormone therapy and starting to live life outwardly as a woman are all steps in a process. And that all takes time.
Yeah.
And transition is such a weird thing because it's never a thing that's done. I can't be like, oh, I'm done with transition now. Like,
right.
Life is transition.
Right.
Every step in the process is a transition. I never could say that I'm done exactly. And it's hard to say when it began. I could say that like the day I started hormone therapy was the day it began, but I could also say like the day that I put on the first pair of heels that I ever put on was the day it began, and that was when I was 4. So, who knows? Exactly. The day that I consciously said to another person, I'm transgender, was about 2 weeks before Halloween in 2015.
What year did your father die again?
2015.
Okay. This is such a huge risk to say because it sounds like I'm trying to be a therapist and I'm trying to create my own narrative of this, and I'm in no way a trained medical therapist. But
no, you're fine.
But it sounds to me
it's fine. I'm a therapist, Patrick.
Okay.
We're fine. I'll cover it.
Right. It sounds to me in many ways like your life began with your father's death. That's a huge sweeping generalization, and I realize that it's probably wrong. But for me, it feels like when we talk about your early life, we went straight to your father's passing, and that was the beginning of your transition in many ways. That you felt like maybe you were out from under his expectation of you living in your dead life, your pre-transition life.
It's been very easy for me to conflate the two.
Right. Maybe I'm being facile by doing that, but
it's easy for me to do the same. And I don't know that that's fair to him or my grandma. Both of them had said a lot of things to me throughout my life that
like, don't be a sissy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And more than that, there's this thing that I say a lot, that my dad and I were watching an episode of ER in whenever the first season of that was. I think it was 1993, and I was 12 years old or something. And we had a friend over. My dad had one of his friends over. I was 12. I didn't have friends with adults, but so we were sitting around watching ER, and it was me and my dad and his friend. And my dad loved to joke about everything inappropriately, of course. In the episode of ER, there was a trans woman, which, 1993, it was pretty progressive television, I guess, to have a trans woman.
Was the trans woman a punchline, though?
No, not in this case.
That's good. That is. It was
a drama. She was. She had come in for something. She was feeling something or whatever. She had some malady, and the doctor was treating her, and found out that she was trans, and then instantly started treating her as male, as they would do in 1993.
Yeah.
And she started explaining to him that when she was young, she always felt different, and that when she moved out on her own, she started transitioning and took hormones and started living as a woman, and that her dad came to see her and met her at the door and thought that she was her own girlfriend.
Yeah.
And she was like, "No, Dad, it's me. I'm your kid." And he was like, "You'll always be a boy to me. You'll never be a girl. You'll always be a boy to me. I'll love you or whatever, but you'll never be a woman to me."
Right.
And she was sad about that. And my dad turned to me and he said, "Son, there's one thing I want in this world. One thing more than anything else is for you to never tell me you want to be a woman." And the night before, I'd been in my room wearing one of my mom's dresses.
Do you think your dad was aware of that on any level? Do you think that he was actually trying to control your behavior, or was by pretending to make a joke?
I was positive of it at the time.
Yeah. How old were you? You said you were 11?
I was like 12 at the time.
I mean, there is a certain amount of, as a 12-year-old, you're only just starting to lose the illusion that your parents are omniscient.
Right. And I thought I was really good at hiding things.
Yeah.
And I still think I am, but I'm not. I'm really fucking obvious about everything. Apparently. I have so many tells, and I'm really bad about being obvious.
Sounds to me like your dad might have had a hint that something was happening.
I've also asked my mom that very question.
What did she say?
She had said she had no idea, that neither of them had any idea.
Well, he might not have said anything.
And I asked specifically, and I was like, "What about this? What about this? What about this?" I also have it's not a photographic memory exactly, but it's a fairly close to photographic memory. So I remember incidents in their entirety, and especially ones that are somewhat traumatic. I can pull them up and remember exact words that were said and exact settings and play them back in my head. So, anything that seemed like it was worth replaying, I can replay it perfectly in my head. Yeah. And, I can play back that instance perfectly. I can play back the instance where I was in the laundry room with makeup on my face and my parents got home and I didn't have any of my own clothes in the laundry room, just what I was wearing of my mom's. And
how old were you at that point?
16. And my dad and I was like, I locked the door to the laundry room and my dad came downstairs and he was like, "We've got food, come upstairs." And I was like, okay, I'll be upstairs. And all my clothes were upstairs. And I was like, what the fuck am I going to do? And I found some dirty clothes in the laundry that I wore upstairs to go get changed, and first ran to the bathroom and washed my face off or whatever. And then I took a bite into my burrito that they had gotten from Taco Bell, and there was a lipstick ring around the burrito. And I was like, I'm going to go eat in my bedroom. Bye. And freaking out about it or whatever, which I don't think I've actually ever told that story to anybody except for right now.
That sounds incredibly stressful.
Yeah. I mean, I've got probably 30 stories like that from growing up of sneaking around and freaking out and being stressed out about it.
Yeah.
And, there's probably another 30 from my adult life where I got to college and was more free to be myself.
Where'd you go to college?
In Denver. Once I graduated high school, I moved to Denver and went to the Art Institute of Colorado and got my own apartment and lived in the heart of the city in the Capitol Hill neighborhood of Denver. And it was kind of wonderful because I had my own place and I could dress up whenever I wanted. And I had a fake ID, so I could go to bars at 18. And so I went to the goth club that was right around the corner and would dress up all gothy. And, it was a nice escape. Like, I wasn't even drinking at the time. I was just going to get into the club to present feminine and
have your gender euphoria moment.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also I had it so that I could go see punk shows because all of the good shows were at this club in Denver called the 15th Street Tavern, which is a famous place that no longer exists. It's a parking lot now. It was the place where all of the amazing shows happened in Denver. And so I got to see some really amazing stuff happen.
Were you playing music then, or when did you start playing music?
I started playing music when I was 14. Started playing guitar at the time, and then switched to bass when I moved to Wyoming. I got a bass, and was in my first band when I was 16.
What was that band called?
We were a really awful ska band called Overview.
You could have had a lot worse name than Overview. There were a lot of ska bands with unbelievable names.
Yeah. We didn't have a ska in the band name, at least, I guess. So that was nice.
That's what I was sort of thinking. Yeah.
And then I wasn't in another band until after college, actually, somehow. I tried, I guess, but I just, like, in college, I was busy in college. Like, I didn't, the school I went to was year round. Art Institute set up to where you take classes year round. You don't get your summers off. So I didn't have time for a band, like, to tour in the summer or whatever.
What was your primary artistic expression?
My degree's in graphic design.
Yeah.
Which digital stuff has always been where I've gravitated. And also, like, I don't know. The expectation for me was always to get a job and earn money and make a stable life for myself. And I think that's find a partner.
Really huge for gender non-binary or just people who, like, growing up in the time that I grew up in the South, to be able to identify, in most of the cases, mostly I knew gay men and women, and just to be able to move to Atlanta, which had a very gay-friendly scene, especially in the 70s when my mom, being a former opera singer, had all these friends who were gay. And for them to be able to get jobs doing creative work, a lot of graphic design, a lot of interior design, it was the 70s, and people were kind of allowing themselves to be kind of, they had some traditional roles for gay men and women, but just the freedom to have a community and to have your own income was huge, because then you were free of the expectations of parents who wanted you to be quote unquote normal.
Right. Well, and for me, it wasn't that, because for me, I'm 100% a lesbian.
Yeah, that was I was coming to that question. So you're trans woman attracted to women.
Yep.
So you were dating women through this period of college. You're going to goth nights and having some experiences with this gender euphoric identity as female, but you're also dating women.
The whole thing is really, really, really hard to figure out. And I'm trying to write a thing about it right now, a little essay about it. And it's so hard to parse out in my brain, but let me try here. There's a lot of argument over, even in the trans community, over the idea that we're female from birth. A trans woman is female from birth. Because like that's a wonderful narrative, and that makes everything so easy.
Right.
Like I love that narrative, and it makes things great. But
and the kind of certainty that gives the narrative allows you to have some defense against these horrible transphobic attacks from TERFs and other scum-like people.
And it lets me fill in a lot of blanks for myself.
Right.
But it could also so easily be used to gatekeep a lot of people.
Yep.
And like, so what if somebody's 25 and they just decide that they want to be a girl? Like, or, you know, so what if somebody's 38 and they decide they want to be a boy?
Right.
Let them. It's their body. It's their decision. There's nothing wrong with that. If they're of sound mind and body and they want to do that, let them. There's nothing wrong with that.
Now,
in my head, at least.
As a cis-het white guy, this may seem like an incredibly naive thing to say, but it seems to echo the discussions we were having in the 90s about genetic predisposition towards homosexuality.
Right.
There was a lot of people like, well, you know, it's genetic and you can't discriminate based on, you can't call it a lifestyle choice.
Right.
But, you know, the fact that I have an identical twin brother and we wave at each other from opposite ends of the Kinsey scale, he's married to a man and I am very heterosexual. And so the whole genetic argument seemed to me to be like an unnecessary attempt at analyzing something that shouldn't be up for question in the first place. Like,
right. Exactly.
You don't really have the right to, especially if you're in some position of authority, to start deciding who is and isn't really gay and who is or isn't really a woman or who is or isn't really a man. Like, fuck off with that.
Exactly. Now, that said, my very cursory understanding of trans biology is that in my case, in the womb, everyone starts out female.
Right.
And male people, people who are assigned male at birth, let's use more proper terminology, I say, they receive masculinizing hormones in the womb. Like, you know, they would receive testosterone, let's say, from their mother, because every person produces both estrogen and testosterone. Men produce both, women produce both. So in utero, I received hormones to masculinize my body, but they didn't happen to get to my brain. And that's the way that they're kind of understanding it. And there's actually been research done into this, and it shows that the brains of trans women operate in the same way as cis women. The gray matter is really similar. The way they operate is really similar. And the way trans women's brains operate is not similar to cis men.
Interesting.
So, you know, when somebody says they've got a female brain in a masculine body, it's actually true in a lot of cases. Now, that's the kind of thing that could be used to discriminate against some trans women and be like, oh, we're sorry, you've got a masculine brain and a masculine body. You're not allowed to transition. That would be really fucked up and not fair. So that's what I'm saying. That's not science that should be used necessarily against everybody, but I want to preface that all by saying this so that I can explain my story that uses all of that technology.
Right. Terminology.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
So, the way I've been thinking about this, my parents did their very best that they could. But no kid comes with an instruction manual, right?
Right.
And even if I did, they were given an instruction manual for the wrong model. Like, you know, they were given an instruction manual for a refrigerator, and they were trying to, figure out how to use a dishwasher.
Right.
So they were doing their very best, and I wasn't. And so with matters of love and relationships, a lot of what I was doing was stuff that I saw on TV.
Right.
And like trying to figure that out. But at the same time, like, I was a little girl. I wanted little female friends. I wanted little girlfriends. Like, and I was being stuck with little guys because that was what all the little boys did.
Right.
And not to say that I didn't like the little boys that I was hanging out with, because they were all cool little kids. And, you know, until you're like 10, you don't even really know the difference, I suppose. All kids are kids, essentially.
My daughter's best friend is trans.
Oh, really? Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. They're in Brownie Scouts together, and
that's wonderful.
her parents are incredible. They're 9.
Yeah.
So yeah.
In Nebraska, that would have never happened.
Yeah. I think her parents they're from up north. And they're living in a college town. I mean, Athens is a college town, and it's a different time.
Yeah,
it's not the 80s, you know.
I have a friend who we were having lunch together, me and my best friend and her, and we were all sitting around, and she was like, "Oh, yeah, I thought about transitioning in high school. I really thought about it at the time because I really thought that I was a trans man, but I decided not to because I don't think that's the right thing for me. And I'm pretty glad that I didn't at the time." And I was like, "Holy cow, in high school you were thinking about that?" She was like, "Yeah. And, I was dating this guy that would wear dresses to school every day, and he would wear makeup, and he was really cute." And I was like, "I wonder what her name is now," just kind of joking or whatever. And I was like, You dated a guy that wore dresses to school? And I was like, how did they not get beaten up every day? And she's like, "Oh, we went to an art specific school." And I was like, I went to school 3 blocks from where they had Matthew Shepard's funeral.
Oh God. Yeah.
I couldn't be perceived as gay, let alone trans.
Yeah.
Or else you would get, I would say murdered, jokingly, but it's not even jokingly.
No, they murdered Matthew Shepard.
Yeah. I mean, the high school kids there were ruthless in Wyoming. And this was like the liberal town.
Do you still wrestle with shame about that? I mean,
God, yeah. Yeah, no, I work on it daily. I post a lot on social media, which I'm sure you're quite aware, and I'm really full of self-hatred about being trans and about presenting female, because for years it was all done in secret.
Yeah.
And, I guess at the time it was considered cross-dressing by me. And cross-dressing was a thing that I was told by my parents that perverts did.
Yeah.
And my grandma didn't catch me exactly, but she noticed that some of her things were disturbed one time.
Right.
And knew that it was me. And then the next time I went and saw her, she had done her research in 1950s textbooks from the library.
Oh, boy.
And so she had then, you know, she was like, I did my research and I know that this isn't something you can stop. But what if we went and got you some nice silk boxers instead or something? And I was like, well, I can stop. It's fine. You know, it's not something that I need to do. You know, don't worry about it. And she was like, well, I just, you know, you're such a nice boy, and I wouldn't want a dirty little secret like this to get out and ruin our family's reputation, or to ruin your, you know, I would hate for a future spouse to find out about this and ruin your chances of having a regular life. And
how old were you when this happened?
18.
Jesus Christ. To be 18 and be told basically by the family matriarch, and it sounds like the family sort of revolved around her.
Yeah.
That this thing that you're feeling, you're never going to be normal.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
stop this thing that is, you know, that you think about daily and that you're concerned about, because it's, you know, it's the thing that will be the family's undoing. And it's the thing that we're all ashamed of.
Never mind that your dad is the town hippie who's selling weed to high school students, right?
Yeah. He's no longer under her thumb.
Right. But for God's sake, don't be your authentic self, because...
Yeah. Well, they also would drive me to the barber shop once a month to get my hair cut.
Right.
Because I wanted to grow it out long, obviously.
Right.
And that was untowards for our family. We had a reputation to uphold, and there was no way that I was going to be running around looking ragged.
Yeah.
I was the future of the family. I had to maintain the bloodline for the Cool family. I had to squire children that were males so that we could pass on the family name.
So Cool is your birth name?
Yep.
I didn't know that.
It comes from Germany, and it means cabbage, like coleslaw.
Oh, wow.
And I don't know why I always feel like I have to demean it a little bit like that. Like, I can't just be like, yeah, it's cool. It means cool. Like, I'm a cool person. I have to be like, no. I am not a cool person. It means cabbage.
That sounds like some of that
self-effacing Midwest humbleness.
And that shame that has been beaten into you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, you know.
Do you ever get exhausted having to explain yourself, though? Like, you've just basically laid out to me this very... I've used this word before, elemental identity issue that you're dealing with and trying to find some peace with. But man, I don't have to do that, like, ever. Like, I'm just a guy with a wife and a child, and no one ever says, why are you doing what you're doing? Like, I mean, it's got to be a little exhausting sometimes.
Yeah, I'm exhausted all the time.
Yeah.
You had brought it up very briefly earlier when I was out drum shopping yesterday.
Well, I saw your social media post, and someone actually apparently had the fucking audacity to refer to you as the gentleman in the dress.
Yeah. Every single place I went into yesterday, they would refer to me using masculine pronouns. And I mean, I know my voice is deep and not super feminine.
I mean, so is Candace Bergen's, though.
Yeah. And I've worked on it. It's not this hormones do nothing for voice. Yeah. This is the voice that I've cultivated over 3 years. So it's softer and less resonant and different from the voice that I used for 30 years. So, you know, I try, but, yeah, it, you know, I mean, the thing is, 6 foot tall and I weigh 300 pounds. I'm a big girl. You know, there's nothing I can do about that. I'm working on it, but there's nothing I can do about my height. My shoulders I'm built like a linebacker. There's nothing I can do about that.
The audacity, though, if someone feels comfortable misgendering someone. Like, if I walked into a pawn shop and somebody repeatedly misgendered me, as a Southern heterosexual man, at some point I'd start flipping fucking tables over.
Yeah.
Like, I can't imagine what it's like to deal with that disrespect all the time. Like, I don't know what I would do with all the anger, which might bring us to the next question, or the thing you wanted to refer back to is your performance persona, where sometimes.
Well, let me just say, flipping tables over is no good way to get a $200 drum set.
No, it's true.
It's true. Yeah, I mean,
that may be a character flaw on my part, by the way. Let's just take a second to like look at the whole, like, oh, you're referring to me as a woman. Like, somehow my socialization is to take that as a huge offense. And as I look at that now, sort of objectively, maybe for the first time, that's kind of weird.
Yeah. I mean, in my case, it is most definitely rude of them. I was wearing a dress yesterday and a full face of makeup. And
I just don't understand the impulse that makes someone feel like they have to misgender people. Like, I mean, I will say this though, the last time anybody actually like busted out the N-word in front of me, completely unselfconsciously, was at a pawn shop. Like, so, you know, I worked in a pawn shop. It's a fucking grubby business. And I think gross. That people, I mean, oh, you need some money for survival, or you need money for drugs, or bring me some precious thing that you paid a lot more money for, and I'm going to give you a fraction of what it's worth so you can go fill whatever. Yeah. So, I mean, if you got that drum set for $260, then whoever pawned it got less than $50 for it, because that's how the pawn shop economy works. But I just don't understand why the sort of Ben Shapiro's of the world feel a need to dictate what your gender identity is. Like, what the fuck is that dude's deal? Yeah.
Well, in Colorado Springs, for anyone that doesn't know, is home of Focus on the Family. It's a very Republican part of Colorado. Colorado, on whole, is pretty darn liberal.
That's where Colorado Springs. So your partner's parents are in Colorado Springs.
Yeah. It's very much the right-wing conservative evangelical Christian part of Colorado Springs.
So
stage persona.
Yeah.
I know it's there. I remember. It just takes me a bit to come back to things. So the pin that I put in it was that sometimes I can flail around and hurt myself.
Yes.
And I was in a band called Great American Housefire for 6 years.
Yes. So when you began that band, you were identifying as masculine, as male.
Yes. Yeah. And so I was in the band Spokeshaver, which I talked about earlier. And
it sounds like an amazing band. Is Spokeshaver's music available?
Yeah, it's online. We have one 6-song EP online.
Okay.
And we were working on other stuff. There's some YouTube videos available of that stuff, but nothing recorded. We broke up before we recorded that stuff, and sadly, our guitar player committed suicide. And we never got to record any of that stuff. So
depression.
Severe alcoholism and depression. I was in another band called The Uncertain Sea at the time, which is like a math rocky kind of. It was like math rock meets Neil Young, kind of.
Sounds great.
Yeah. That was a really fun band too. And that band ended up ending. And it kind of worked out to where I was like, maybe I should just quit all of the bands that I'm in and start something new. And I took Kristen to lunch one day and I'm like, I think I'm quitting all the bands that I'm in and I'm starting something new. And I want you to sing in the new thing. She's like, yeah, let's do that. And I was like, we need to break up Spokeshaver so that Rich can figure it out and get some help. And she's like, yeah, I think that's a good idea. And so we did that. And it went well. Like he He understood, I think. He had got clean and sober again, and had a good job at Home Depot that he enjoyed, and we hadn't seen him for a while. Like, he had kind of stopped hanging out with all of his old friends, which was good. And then his parents went out of town for a weekend, and he had he was living with his parents, but his parents had gone out of town for the weekend, and he had the house to himself. And that was the last we heard of him. So I never officially heard that he killed himself, but
right.
Seems axiomatic at this point.
Yeah,
though.
Exactly.
Yeah.
After having been in a room with him with a gun, I've got to imagine.
How old was he?
A couple of years younger than me, 37, 36, something like that. I mean, he would have been, let's see. This was in February of the year that I started transition. So he would have been like 33 or 34.
2016.
Yeah.
It was 2016. Exactly. Yeah.
Yep.
So you and Kristen make this clean break from the Uncertain Sea and your other band, and you start. Is that how the Great American Housefire started?
Yeah, exactly. And so it was me and her, and then I had a friend from high school who had moved to Denver, and him and I had been really close friends in high school, and I was like, hey, it'd be fun to hang out with this guy because I haven't hung out with him in a long time. And in some aspects, it was fun to hang out with him. And in other aspects, he remembered the high school me, and I remembered the high school him. And now I was 35 and a woman, and he was 35 and a cop, and a Republican and a Christian, and I am Antifa and a socialist, and so it wasn't fun. And the reason I'm being a little cagey about his name is because he works in law enforcement, and I am not supposed to say that. So I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, we can leave that there.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Do you think of yourself as a high-achieving person?
Ooh.
Because let me give you my perspective on it while you sort of ruminate on that thought.
Yeah. I've got an answer for it.
Right.
I'm trying to figure out how to word it. But
well, I'm just looking at what you've accomplished with so far. We've talked about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bands, and you've got this enormous gear collection. You've got a video podcast. You've got a career as a graphic artist. And we haven't even talked about what you do every day to make a living.
Yeah.
And yet when I sort of perceive you via your social media account that we share, as I see you on Facebook is what I'm trying to say. Mm-hmm. You seem, like I said earlier, really kind of living in this cloud of shame and doubt. And yet, like, look at all this amazing shit you've done.
Yeah. I know you and Fez had talked about imposter syndrome, and that's something that I deal with a lot.
Episode 4.
Yep. I have really bad imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
In a lot of cases.
I can't imagine why.
I never was formally.
You lived the first 5 years of your life?
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, impersonating a man. Exactly.
I don't mean, I'm not laughing because of.
It's funny. Exactly.
It's just one of those things. I'm not laughing because I think that it's ridiculous. I'm laughing because.
It is ridiculous.
Well, just how heavy that burden is. It's hard enough trying to front as masculine when you're comfortable with it. Sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
and I can't imagine the path from there to imposter syndrome seems fairly linear to me.
Yeah, no, of course.
So it seems like you spend a lot of time just like doing this full immersion to become good at things. And I mean, I do the same thing, but like part of it for me is trying to gain some acceptance.
Yeah, no, exactly.
And I mean, I've just joined a band. I'm going to start playing bass in a band. I don't really know how to play bass, but it's the same thing. Yeah.
Everything I've ever done has been so thought out and so practiced to death.
Right.
Like Housefire, before we played our first show, we practiced for 11 months or something.
Before your first show?
Before our first show. And then like every time in between we'd get a new member, we'd practice for almost a year. Like we had the songs written and it was just training up a new member, and we'd get things so tight with a new member that it was like we'd been playing for a year because we essentially had in a basement, getting them trained up or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's because I wanted there to be no
weak spots.
No chance that anyone could say shit about it. Right. I wanted it to be so perfect that no one could talk shit about it.
Is there a fanzine? Is there like I just know that growing up punk in South Georgia, I wasn't quite as sort of alienated from society or I didn't struggle with acceptance the way that a trans person would, but at least it helped to have Maximum Rock and Roll come to my mailbox every month. Like I could sort of look through that and be like, okay, I'm not the only person like this in the world. And I feel like, is there a magazine, or is there like it seems like that would
be.
I know a graphic designer in Denver.
There's a few Facebook groups.
Yeah. Well, I think they might serve some of the same purpose.
There's a Facebook group called Trans Punks that I belong to. That's pretty good. I've got one called Gender Punks that is smaller, but it's more related to like booking and and trying to like create a network of musicians across the country that are for helping people like set up bands and stuff like that is kind of what we're working on. We're also trying to create a directory of bands that have trans members so that we can, like I said, for booking purposes, a lot, so that like if there's a national touring band that's got trans members and they're trying to put together shows and, they're like, who do I know in St. Louis that's got, a band that has a trans member or whatever. Right. They can be like, oh, I know Lizzie there. Or, who do I know in Chicago? Oh, Alex is in Chicago. Or who do I know in California?
So you don't make the mistake of like booking a show into a non-inclusive space too. I think that's important.
Exactly. Yeah. Or like, then you can ask somebody there like, hey, I'm playing this venue. Is that a good idea? Or is this some biker bar that I'm just going to get murdered in for playing or whatever? We could probably do fly-in weeks or whatever. If we can, jump in a van with somebody else and borrow some gear or whatever, we could fly somewhere and do a week of tours with another friend band or whatever. And, go to California and do a week with a friend there, and go to Seattle and do a week out there, and go to the Midwest and, do a week out there or whatever.
Well, I can tell
that would be really fun.
5/8 and Pinky Doodle Poodle, my two bands, are down, so we should talk about that.
Fucking A, that'd be rad.
Yeah. I have two big questions before we get to the small questions.
Yeah.
One is, how do you feel? I mean, I feel like we're at a place, and maybe this is just apocalyptic thinking on my part, which is common for depressed people, but I really feel like we're at a place in this country where we're either going to get to a point where we can accept each other as who we are and not be quite so threatened, or we're going to take this terrible shift towards this kind of monolithic fearful society that our current president seems to think is ideal. And if that happens, do you have a bug out plan?
There was a heavy sigh on my side, if you couldn't hear that. God, I don't know. The arc of history bends towards morality? Is that the answer to that? My hope is that this is the pendulum swinging far to the right.
Right.
And this is the extreme of it, and we can only go the opposite way. But this seems as though it's the farthest right it's ever swung. I don't know. I don't know the answer. Like,
I think
God, I wish I had an answer.
As a society, I think we're more open than we have been, and that is you're seeing.
Yeah,
is this sort of last gasp of this sort of conservative culture that, like one of the reasons that these people, they own one house of Congress, the Supreme Court, and the White House, and yet they're still so angry. And the reason is because they're losing the culture war, and they realize that. Like everyone under 50 hates the right, pretty much. So I feel like
not everyone.
Well, but I mean, I feel like the people, it's a bunch of these sort of grifters who are taking billionaire money to sort of be, I know a young person and he thinks I'm right. Like, right. And I pay him $100,000 a year, which I feel like is really kind of common grift right now. But
well, and I guess I'm saying this from my perspective of living in the world.
Yeah.
And I said to a friend yesterday, I recently saw our friend Trey Cool, and he sees me struggle too. Mm-hmm. Because I'm really vocal about everything, because I think it's really important for me to be like, a lot of people have never met a trans woman before. A lot. Or at least maybe they've seen one in passing. Right. Or they have a clerk at their local Walmart that is a trans woman or something. And like they see her in, when they check out and they think, oh, that poor guy or something, but they don't really know anything. Right. Like they don't know to use her pronouns, or they don't think that she's a woman. They think like, oh yeah, there's a guy that dresses in, women's clothes at my Walmart or whatever. And they don't know what to think about her. And so I think it's important for me to put my story out there as widely as I can and be very vocal about my struggles so that people understand that. And also from a selfish standpoint, I'll take pity as a way to soothe my anger sometimes. Which is probably not super healthy, but I do it anyway. Yeah. But I saw Trey recently, and he, as he was giving me a hug on his way out of town, he said, I want you to harden your heart, and I want you to stop giving a shit what everyone thinks. Because you care too much what everyone thinks, and you give people too much credit. And like you give people's opinion too much credit, was the gist of what he was saying. And he's not the first person to tell me that.
Yeah.
And I don't want that to sound harsh from him. Like that's something that I can say and people would be like, oh, that's a horrible thing to tell someone.
I know Trey well enough to know that what he's saying is that I can't be there to break people's noses for you.
Yes, exactly.
And he would do it.
I've had other trans women tell me that too. They're like, oh, you can't, you need to be more cynical. You are way too, you're way too accepting of everyone. You're way too open and like you you let people hurt you by misgendering you. And you let people hurt you by giving them the benefit of the doubt. And I a little bit am like, I don't think I can lose my humanity by doing that. It feels to me like if I do just shut everyone off and be like, oh, everyone in the world's horrible. I would love to love everyone, but I can't do that. Like, that seems so harsh and awful to me.
Well, it sounds to me like you have trouble turning off the part of you that forgives people before that you forgive them, even though they're being unkind to you, that you see the part of them that is decent.
Right, exactly.
I mean,
and I think that what it's come down to, because I've thought about that a lot since he said that to me, and I think that what it comes down to is that there's a balance there. Right. Is that you have to, like, recognize that what they're saying is not. I think about the guys in the pawn shop yesterday.
Yeah.
What they're saying is not necessarily malicious because they hate me. It's quite possibly that they've never met a trans person before. They have no idea what to do in this case. Maybe they don't understand that I'm a woman. Maybe they think that I'm just dressed up like a woman for some reason.
Yeah.
Maybe they, maybe they've never met a trans woman and they don't know to use female pronouns in my case. Maybe they are bigots and they have been taught by their pastor or their friends or society or whatever that I'm evil, and they are, trying to impress their friends that they're not gay or whatever. And,
I mean,
not
the possibility
that I would have any interest in them, whatever. But
yeah,
the point is, like, it's not my fault that they're wrong.
The possibility exists that they've got lipstick rings on their own burritos too.
Exactly.
Like the most fierce, fiercely hateful people I've ever known were hiding enormous secrets.
Yep. I was an absolute asshole about trans people when I was deeply in the closet. Not
really?
Asshole. When I was young, people would say things and I would not ever correct them. And I might, I would laugh at jokes that were at my expense.
Yeah.
Not directly, but, somebody would make a joke about a trans person and I would laugh at it. And I guess the point of this is, like, I didn't stand up for myself yesterday and tell them I use she pronouns. I use, my name's Josie. I'm not a man. A little bit topically, I don't know if anyone in your audience or you had seen the GameStop video of the trans woman that went into the GameStop and, like, they were purposefully misgendering her. And she's like, it's her, it's she, I'm a woman. And then, like, knocked over their displays and got really belligerent. Yeah. And it got really viral and she went really viral and everyone made a lot of fun of her. And in her case, she decided to use that to create a rap career, which I don't know.
Yeah.
All of that is not the way I would have gone about it.
Yeah.
But I don't begrudge her being mad about it.
I mean, yeah,
I don't
of course.
begrudge her being hurt, obviously.
Right.
I wouldn't have taken the fame and created a goddamn rap career out of it. Jesus fucking Christ. But I also, like, I get really worried when somebody misgenders me. And, like, the last thing I want to do is go, it's her. It's man. Because the last thing I want to do is have somebody be like, oh, he's a tranny like that one in the video.
Right.
Because, God, that would make me feel awful.
Yeah.
And that's, that's likely internalized transphobia inside of myself. But also, I don't know. I don't want them to laugh at me.
Yeah. So what do you do as sort of self-care? Like, I know you're doing therapy. You mentioned that.
I'm seeing 2 therapists currently.
See, that's your overachiever.
Yeah, I see a therapist weekly, and have for over a year. I actually had seen a different therapist who was a trans woman, and she was awful and said awful things.
What? Really? That's weird.
Including, I don't think of myself as a woman. I'm a man with a mental illness. And this makes me feel better transitioning. And that's the way people see me. And that's fine.
Holy shit. Eject.
Yeah. And that was the last session that I had with her.
Yeah.
So, and then I didn't see a therapist for 2 years after that. And my mental health got so bad to the point that I had several friends tell me that I had to go see a therapist.
Yeah.
Which
was that your first therapist?
It was. Yeah. She was the one that wrote the note that allowed me to get on hormone therapy.
Well,
which was good at the time, but then I was also struggling with all of these issues. Like, how do I, at the time I was like, I don't have the body of a cis female, and I'm different than cis females, and I had all this different upbringing, and a lot of the TERF talking points I was dealing with myself. Like, how do I reconcile these things? And she was like, well, I don't think of myself as the same as a cis woman, which that I can see. Like, yeah, we're different. We had different experiences. That's the correct way of saying it. But she said, like, oh, I'm not a cis woman. I don't think of myself as a woman exactly. I'm a man that blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, that's not the right way to think about it. Especially somebody that's like, a year into transition and trying to figure this out. That's not the way you fucking tell me that.
No.
So
I think we should probably clarify for people who don't know what a TERF is. It stands for...
Sorry.
We both use that term, and it just occurred to me that there's going to be some of my listeners who are like, I don't even know what that means. TERF is TERF, Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminist, which is a peculiar subset of anti-trans woman feminists. There seem to be more of them in England than the U.S., but just some of
them here.
Most joyless, just horrible people.
Yeah. I think it grew, and I don't want to generalize, but from my understanding, it grew a lot out of second wave feminism, in that it was very much second wave feminism came to hate masculinity in a lot of its forms, which there's a lot to hate, I guess, and that's, again, a generalization, but, there was a lot of destruction of patriarchy in that, and they think that a lot of trans women are trying to take the feminine experience away from women, which is not what I'm doing at all.
Yeah.
And they think they also have all of these crazy notions about trans people, like that I still have all of my masculine privilege, and that I get female privilege from it also, which I definitely do not get either of those things.
So when you say second wave feminists, I'm assuming you mean sort of boomer era, like the Women's Festival, MYN, WMYN.
Yes. Yeah. Greer is a big proponent of it. There's we had mentioned the YouTuber ContraPoints earlier.
Yes.
And she has a wonderful video that she recently put out called Gender Critical. And anyone that's interested in this topic should go watch that, because she covers it all way better than I ever could. And it'll give you everything you need to know about TERFs and discusses why they're so wrong. But in the thing, she talks about privilege a lot. And she says in there, one of my favorite lines is, trans women don't have like male privilege at all. And if you're read as trans, you don't have female privilege either. And the line that she says is, trans women's pronouns are it and spit. And that's really true. Like,
yeah.
they don't see me, like, people don't see me and like first think woman and then see man, and like they don't wolf whistle me and then be like, oh, I'm sorry, sir. Oh, I'm sorry. You'll have to forgive me. They accidentally wolf whistle and then see me and then beat me to pieces in the street. And I say that I had gotten into an argument on Facebook the other day with this Midwestern fella, and he was like, people don't get beaten up in America in 2019. Or killed. He was like, nobody gets beaten up and killed in the streets in America in 2019.
Right. And he probably also argued that white privilege doesn't exist.
Literally 3 weeks ago in Denver, the night of the PRF barbecue that we had, I walked by a street, and an hour later, one of my trans sisters was on the same street corner getting into her car. She had gotten back out, and a guy came over, punched her 3 times in the face while a crowd of people was watching and videotaping, and it broke her jaw in several places, and she has facial paralysis for the rest of her life as a result of it.
Jesus Christ.
And so, and he had hit on her earlier in the night. And then when he found out she was trans, he followed her around, made her incredibly uncomfortable. And then, as she made her way out to the car, he attacked her and violently beat her and left her on the street while a crowd of people watched. In a lot of cases, the law is on their side because they'll use what's called the trans panic defense.
Yeah,
which says,
I'm familiar.
He's a man, and I thought that he was a woman, and when I found out he was a man, it made me go insane, and I had to kill him.
Yeah, no.
And a judge has accepted that as a defense and let people off with that before.
Yeah.
And also, I should mention, that was the 3rd similar beating in Denver this year.
Did they catch the guy?
No.
All the video.
I don't think it's the same guy in all cases. I think it's 3 separate beatings.
Oh, I just meant the one on the night of the
No, but yeah. No, there's no suspects in it.
It's amazing.
Also, big shocker. Cops don't give a shit about trans people. In most cases won't even look for suspects. Also, when it was reported, won't gender us correctly. They female pronoun names, and they used his dead name because the police in Colorado have to. There's a rule in all police departments in Colorado that you use the sex listed with the DMV. And you use the name listed with the DMV. Even if they have a name that they prefer and a gender that they prefer, you use what's with the DMV or what's on the birth certificate.
Do you do meds other than the hormone replacement therapy? Or are you doing it in any?
Oh God, am I on meds?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm on. Let's see. I'm on citalopram. For depression.
I've never even heard of that. I don't know.
It's a generic of something.
Yeah.
But it's fine. It seems to work.
Yeah.
I about a year ago, I almost threw myself in a river. I had made plans to drive 2 hours into the mountains and climb up on a dam that I had visited one time and throw myself off of a dam.
All right, that's part 1 of our interview with Josie Cool. Part 2 will come out on Sunday, June 2nd at 12:01 a.m. So when you wake up Sunday morning, that should be waiting for you. Or if you're up late, it'll be available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or whatever you used to listen to podcasts on, or you can go straight to our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/crashandride. You may have noticed some digital distortion on the interview. This was done over Skype, and sometimes the sound quality is not great, but I try to do as many interviews as I can in person, but when Josie offered to be on the show, I was like, I'm going to do this over Skype just because I feel like it's important enough to get it down. And so, yeah, sorry about that. Just want to remind everybody, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is 24/7, confidential, and free. 1-800-273-8255. Give them a call if you're contemplating self-harm or you're struggling. If you need to contact me or the show, crashandride@protonmail.com. That email is confidential. It's encrypted. Nobody reads it but me. I'll protect your anonymity at all costs. Reach out if you need us. Also, if you're interested in maybe being a sponsor of the show, that's how you get in touch with us, crashandride@protonmail.com. Tune in next week. Like I said, Sunday, June 2nd. Part 2 of this interview will be out. It's every bit as good as part 1, maybe better. And I'm really grateful to Josie for agreeing to do this. In the meantime, be kind to yourself, take care of yourself, ask for help if you need it, go see live music, support your favorite bands, and remember, loud guitars save lives.